Tomorrow, you'll probably eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, maybe a snack in between. It feels so natural that most of us never question it. 3 meals, roughly the same times every day, like it's written into human nature itself. But if you went back 50,000 years and told your ancestors you eat on a fixed schedule, same time, every day, whether you're hungry or not, they wouldn't just be confused. They'd think you were insane. To them, food wasn't a schedule. It was an event, something that happened when it happened, not when a clock said it should. So, where did 3 meals a day actually come from? It turns out the answer has almost nothing to do with biology, and almost everything to do with factories, candles, and the invention of the clock itself. Let's dig into how humans actually ate for most of our history, and how a handful of very recent, very human decisions convinced billions of us that 3 meals a day is just normal. For the overwhelming majority of the roughly 300,000 years modern humans have existed, there was no such thing as a meal time. There was only food availability, and it was wildly unpredictable. A successful hunt might mean a group eats an enormous amount of meat in a single sitting, sometimes several pounds per person, because there was no refrigeration, and meat spoils fast in the open air. Eat it now while it's good because there's no guarantee of food tomorrow. On the other hand, a bad week of hunting, a drought, or a harsh winter could mean going a day, 2 days, sometimes longer with very little food at all. This pattern is often called feast or famine, and it wasn't a metaphor, it was literally how early humans ate. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies, such as the Hadza of Tanzania or the San people of the Kalahari, have found that these groups typically eat when food is available and when they're hungry, not according to any fixed schedule. Meals can happen once, twice, or several times in a day, depending entirely on circumstances, what was found, what was hunted, what was shared. And sharing is a key detail here. In small hunter-gatherer bands, food, especially a large kill like an animal, was typically distributed across the group rather than eaten only by the person who found it. That meant eating patterns weren't even just personal. They were tied to a constantly shifting social and environmental situation. There was no dinner table. There was just, is there food right now? And if so, let's eat it before it's gone. This irregular eating pattern isn't unique to humans either. It mirrors how most wild animals eat today, opportunistically, based on availability, not on a schedule. The idea of eating at fixed times, several times a day, every single day, is actually the unusual behavior in the animal kingdom, or the outlier. The first real shift toward more structured eating happened with the rise of agriculture, starting roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. Once humans began farming instead of hunting and gathering, food became more predictable. You could plant, harvest, and store grain. That predictability opened the door to more regular eating patterns. But even then, regular didn't mean 3 meals a day like we think of it now. In many early agricultural societies, evidence suggests people ate 1 or 2 substantial meals daily, often tied closely to the rhythm of physical labor. A common pattern in many ancient farming cultures, from Rome to parts of medieval Europe, was one large meal around midday. When the sun was highest and work paused, sometimes with a lighter meal added in the evening. Breakfast, as a distinct expected meal, was actually viewed with suspicion for much of history. In ancient Rome, for example, many people ate just once a day, and eating multiple times was sometimes associated with gluttony rather than health. Some Roman writers explicitly criticized the habit of eating more than one substantial meal, treating it as a lack of self-discipline, not a nutritional necessity. Even the word breakfast gives away how recent the concept really is. It literally means breaking the fast from the night before, implying that going without food overnight, and sometimes well into the following day, was the norm rather than the exception. This is where the story gets genuinely surprising. The rigid 3 meals a day structure most of the world follows today is largely a product of the last few hundred years, and it's tied directly to two very specific developments, the mechanical clock and industrial labor. Before clocks were widespread, people didn't organize their day around specific hours. Time was tracked more loosely by the position of the sun, the crowing of roosters, or church bells, marking general periods of the day. Eating happened when it made sense, often tied to natural breaks in physical work, like pausing at midday when the sun was highest and manual labor was hardest to continue. Mechanical clocks became more common in towns and cities, starting around the 14th century. But the real turning point for meal scheduling came later, with the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries. Here's the key shift. Before factories, most people worked on farms, where labor was task-based and eating could flex around it. But factory work ran on strict clock time. Workers had to arrive at a set hour, work in synchronized shifts, and take breaks at scheduled times because factory production depended on everyone being present and working simultaneously. You couldn't just eat when you were hungry on a factory floor. The machines didn't pause for that. This created a powerful cultural and economic pressure towards standardized eating times. Breakfast became fixed around the start of the workday. Lunch became a fixed midday break, often shortened to the minimum time needed to keep production running. Dinner became fixed around the end of the shift, when families were finally reunited in the evening. Over a few generations, this factory schedule, originally designed to organize labor efficiently, not to optimize human digestion or health, became so widespread that it started to feel like the natural way humans were supposed to eat. Schools adopted the same structure to prepare children for that same industrial rhythm. Offices followed. Eventually, 3 meals a day wasn't just common. It became the default assumption for what a healthy, normal day looked like, even though it had almost nothing to do with biology and everything to do with organizing labor around a factory clock. This raises an obvious question. If 3 meals a day is a relatively recent invention, does our body actually need to eat that way? The honest scientific answer is more nuanced than either extreme suggests. Human digestion is remarkably flexible. Our bodies evolved to handle irregular eating patterns. Feast, then relative fasting, then feast again, because that's what food availability looked like for almost all of human history. Mechanisms like glycogen storage in the liver and muscles, and the ability to shift into burning stored fat for energy during longer gaps without food, exist precisely because our ancestors couldn't count on regular meals. This is part of why, in recent years, researchers have taken renewed interest in eating patterns like intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating, not necessarily because 3 meals a day is wrong, but because it's worth recognizing that fixed, frequent eating schedules are a relatively modern cultural habit rather than a hardwired biological requirement. What's clear is that the number 3 itself has no special biological significance. There's no internal clock in the human digestive system that says food must arrive exactly 3 times, spaced evenly across 24 hours. That structure came from social convenience, clocks, factories, and school schedules, not from human physiology dictating it. Once the 3 meal structure became embedded in school schedules, work schedules, and family routines, it became almost impossible to unwind, not because it was biologically necessary, but because it was socially reinforced everywhere at once. Advertising in the 20th century played a significant role in cementing this further. Breakfast, in particular, was heavily promoted by food companies in the early to mid-1900s as the most important meal of the day. A phrase that, while it contains some truth about the benefits of not skipping meals entirely for some people, was also amplified through marketing campaigns specifically designed to sell cereal and processed breakfast foods to a public that historically often hadn't eaten a dedicated morning meal at all. Family structures reinforced it too, as industrial work created a clear separation between home and workplace. Family dinner became an important social ritual, a designated time when a household reconnected after a day apart. That social function is real and valuable, but it's a cultural role, not a nutritional one. We didn't start eating dinner together because our stomachs demanded a meal precisely at 6 p.m. We started because that's when factory shifts ended and families were finally back under the same roof. So, why didn't ancient humans eat 3 meals a day? Not because they lacked the discipline or the resources, but because 3 meals a day isn't actually a rule written into human biology at all. It's a scheduling system invented surprisingly recently to organize humans around clocks and factories rather than around hunger itself. For most of the time humans have existed, eating was opportunistic, irregular, and deeply tied to whatever the environment provided that day. Sometimes a feast, sometimes nothing at all. And the human body evolved to handle exactly that kind of unpredictability with remarkable flexibility. It's a strange thing to sit with, something that feels as fundamental and unquestionable as you eat breakfast. Lunch and dinner turns out to be barely a few hundred years old, younger than many buildings still standing today. Our ancestors weren't eating wrong. We just inherited a schedule built for factories and quietly mistook it for human nature.